Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Jojo Fry Rocks. I'm doing another reaction video. Just so happens that another one of my favourite artists has just released a new album at the end of September. So he's just brought out the album Nomad. It is of course the one and only wonderful Richie Kotzen. So I just wanted to kind of share with you all some of my thoughts on the new album. I can't stop listening to it. So, you know, spoiler alert, this is just going to be an overall positive reaction. But I'm super excited about it. So at the same time, you know, I want to just try and give you a bit of a flavour of what you can expect from some of these tracks if you haven't heard it already. If you're a Richie Kotzen fan, obviously you will have already been playing it and probably, like me, just can't stop listening to it. Can't believe how good it is. I feel really lucky, actually, that... so I'm a relatively recent fan of his. I've only sort of discovered him within the last year. And so I've got a lot of his stuff that I've yet to listen to. I haven't worked my way through his entire sort of 30-year back catalogue yet. I've dived into like the essential sort of tracks and a lot of the songs off of his sort of more prominent albums, kind of, you know, 50 for 50, the ones that he's done in the last few years. I've been to see him play live in July, so, you know, not so long ago. So I'm kind of familiar with a lot of his stuff and the Winery Dogs albums as well, and his Smith Kotzen stuff. But really, you know, he's been so prolific over his career that there's still a lot of stuff for me to explore. I haven't really delved into the sort of Motherhead's family reunion stuff, or the stuff he did with Greg Howe, and there's a number of other projects he's been involved in that I haven't really gone into. I've not really listened to a lot of Mr. Big stuff, and I know he was with them for a while. Of course, I know his work with Poison, because I was a Poison fan. So their second album, Native Tongue, was more or less written by Richie, and certainly my favourite songs from that album were written by Richie, unbeknownst to me for all this time, and I can't really believe that I didn't know who he was for all this time. So I do actually feel quite lucky that, to me, really this is all new music, and stuff that I hadn't heard before, you know, before relatively recently, now in the last year. So I've got tons and tons and tons of his stuff to listen to and enjoy, which is fabulous. You know, that's just a really amazing and exciting discovery for me at this point. However, I'm even luckier because he's still going and still putting out the most incredible music. And it's really quite rare, I think. You know, even if you like a band that has been going for a long time and is still going now, you know, sometimes with bands that have been around for a while, or artists that have been around for a long time, the quality does decline sort of later in their career. And I feel like I can say that about some of the bands that I like or have liked. I can definitely say that about a band like Bon Jovi. I don't think many people would argue with that. Sort of their better work was earlier on in their career. For me, that peaked actually in the 90s. These days, I always say, is my favourite album of theirs. I think that's their best work. but sort of post These Days Crossroads sort of era, they went in a slightly different direction. I wasn't that keen, actually, and I do feel like the quality started to decline. I think all of that stuff played into the way things went between John and Richie, and then when Richie left, that was it for me. Like, post 2013, I'm out. So, you know, not all bands and artists continue to sort of make the same level, you know, music at the same level, you know, to the same standard and quality that they have done sort of throughout their career. And there are bands that have, of course, gone up and down and had kind of some rough times and then come back from it and returned to form. But I feel like, as I've been listening to Richie Kotzen's albums and singles and different projects that he's done with different bands, he's done a lot of different things and covered a hell of a lot of ground musically. But there's a consistency to it. Like, there is a consistently high standard, if you like, of songwriting. Like, he just is so good at crafting a song. Obviously the guitar work is, it was incredible straight out the gate. Like, when he did his stuff on Shrapnel Records when he was 18 years old, he was incredible as a guitarist, you know. And even quite early on in his career, his vocal talent was really apparent, you know. And he himself says that he didn't have such great technique back then. And he's obviously developed that over the years. He's had some proper vocal training, and that really, really shows. And that really comes through in his live performance. When I saw him in July in Islington, you could not fault the vocal. It was just beautiful, and it filled that hall. It was really amazing how just, you know, the tone and the quality of his voice was impeccable. It was just remarkable, really. So he's obviously done a lot to take care of that. He's put a lot of effort into his technique, his vocal technique. It's not by accident, you know. He's not just lucky. He's worked at it. And I know that from various sort of interviews where he's described all the different things he's done to change the way that he's used his voice over the years. But even when he was younger, in his early 20s, his vocals were superb. And I just think he's probably blessed with one of those natural sort of amazing sounding voices. But a lot of that is probably also due to the early musical influences that he had. And I will touch on these because it's really relevant to this new record that he's put out, which I think, in my personal opinion, this is some of the best stuff he's ever done. Or this is some of the best stuff I've heard, anyway. There are songs of his that I already love and that I've already formed like a real emotional attachment to. One of which is of course, Until You Suffer Some Fire and Ice, which is a song I've always loved. It's always been one of my favourite songs from the Poison album, Native Tongue. But, you know, in the kind of solo stuff that he's done, there are quite a number of them that I've already, like I say, formed a kind of emotional attachment to. And you're always slightly nervous, in a way, when a band or an artist that you like put out a new album. You know, you're always kind of on edge thinking, oh, I hope it's as good as such and such, this other album, or oh, I hope this new song is going to be as good as this other song that I like. You know, you're kind of like really, really hoping that it's going to be okay, and that there aren't going to be any songs on there that you think, oh, I'd maybe skip that one. You know, it happens though. It does happen, right? I haven't loved every Darkness album that they've ever done. There are some songs that I think, you know, I wonder why they've included, or thought, you know, maybe if they'd spent a little bit more time, they could have improved that. You know, so I'm not someone who's just completely uncritical of bands and artists that I like. It's not unconditional love. It has to be good, or it has to meet a kind of certain expectation, I suppose, that I will have developed through listening to, you know, to their stuff. So yeah, I was a bit sort of nervous when Richie announced that he was putting out a new album. But obviously I've known that since I saw him in July. He announced that, and the single Cheap Shots was already out. So I think I had a certain level of confidence in it already because of Cheap Shots. Like as soon as I'd heard that, and then saw the video for it and everything, it just rocked. It's just great. It's just a really, like, that's a proper sort of rock song. It's really got attitude. It's got a great riff. You know, I've been trying to learn that riff since July. It's one of those that really sort of gets in your head. I remember I had it in my head for days after I first heard it. It's really instantly accessible. It's quite poppy in a way, more so than quite a lot of his other songs anyway. So I thought, yeah, he sounds great. His voice sounds great. It's a great riff. It's got some great hooks, and the whole, you know, lyrically, like, it all is coherent. It makes sense, and I just kind of have loved singing along to it, and I've been enjoying that for the last couple of months. So then he started to kind of drip feed a couple more tracks from the album, sort of in the months since it was announced. And every one, you know, each time I've heard a new one, I've just thought, it's amazing. This is like some of the best stuff I've ever heard, frankly. As I've said, you know, his voice is just probably sounding better than it ever has. So I don't know what he's doing, or whether it's just the fact that he's been, you know, he's out singing, you know, performing, touring, and just kind of keeping it all going. It's maybe one of those sort of use it or lose it things. But it's definitely working for him, whatever it is that he's doing. I mean, he looks like he's really taking care of himself. Like, he looks really, really good. I mean, he's always looked good, but you can tell, I think, when somebody is just in really good shape. You know, their kind of skin glows, their eyes are sparkly. You can just tell, can't you, when someone's really taking care of themselves. So, you know, that all bodes really well. And yeah, so I've been listening to the album sort of on the whole, you know, all the way through, and every time I get to the last track, I just want to put it on again. And it's a long time, honestly, it's a long time since I've listened to a new album that I've instantly connected with, and that I've immediately thought, oh, I want to listen to all that all over again right now, straight away. So it's been a really kind of refreshing experience, actually. I thought sort of early 40s, I'm probably a bit jaded for all this stuff by now. I'm probably a bit too sort of over it all to be that enthusiastic about any new band or new music. Kind of heard it all before. Nothing's really going to impress me very much. This is, this is my sort of general attitude. It's like the state of music today. I've just become very cynical about it all, I suppose. So I just wasn't prepared, I think, to have that sort of feeling again of really liking some music to this kind of extent where I just want to keep hearing it, keep listening to it and watching the videos and stuff. It is like being a kid again. It feels like being a teenager again. It really is quite strange but really nice experience. So yeah, I had an email through because I'm obviously on like every mailing list and everything to do with Richie Kotzen. So I'm, being obviously targeted with a lot of videos in my reels and on Facebook and YouTube and everything. But I had an email just letting me know that the album's out and to order it now. So I just thought I'd kind of share some of the description of it, because this probably sums it up, this sums it up in a more succinct way than I would do, because I am a bit waffly. So, written, recorded and produced by Richie Kotzen. So yeah, he plays all of the instruments. I think there are a couple of tracks where the drums are done by other people. There's one track where Kyle Hughes, who's the new drummer that I saw him play with in Islington, he's on one of the tracks. And another guy called Dan Portruche plays drums, and that's on Nomad. But other than that, yeah, Richie not only kind of writes the songs and sings and plays guitar, but he also plays the drums and the bass and any other instrumentation that's on there. He's also produced it himself, and recorded it, and yeah, basically put the whole thing together. I mean, he's just so incredibly talented, and he can do all of this stuff. So why wouldn't you, I guess? But yes, this album, Nomad, features 8 new tracks showcasing Kotzen's multifaceted musical styles. On Nomad, Kotzen expresses his diverse techniques and influences, from hard rock to 70s-infused soul and funk, jazz fusion to R&B. It's all intertwined with his own unique playing and songwriting approach, while retaining his ever-evolving signature style. Yeah, that's sort of the exact way I would describe it. It is I'd say more actually towards the sort of funk, jazz fusion end of things than rock, actually. It just feels like a soul, R&B, jazz, funk fusion tour de force. And it is quite 70s, actually, in a lot of its in a lot of the sound. And I'll go into that in more detail when we look at each of the tracks. But obviously he's using like wah pedals. He's using kind of just a lot of that kind of 70s funk bass playing and rhythm and beats. on a lot of the tracks, but the guitar is way more inspired and influenced by some of the jazz rock and jazz fusion stuff. Al Di Meola, Alan Holdsworth. And it's really funny because I never knew who any of these people were. And in the recent videos that I've done exploring different genres that I hadn't heard much of before, or had dismissed and thought, oh, I don't like it. You know, I've gone into kind of exploring prog rock a bit more, exploring jazz a bit more, thanks to Binny and Scott and guys that I've been talking to. And I also wanted to talk to Andy Edwards, which, if you've seen his videos and if you subscribe to him, maybe, you know, his channel is kind of all about jazz rock, jazz fusion, bit about prog. It's actually kind of about music in general, but he's like a real sort of expert on jazz fusion stuff. So I finally got round, after messaging him loads and loads and just hassling him and stalking him, he finally messaged me, and we got together and had a bit of a chat, a really long chat actually. But he did a playlist for me, a jazz rock playlist, which was super interesting. And so I've been listening to that stuff really recently, and then the rest of this album came out, and maybe it's something that I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have connected so much and so instantly with it if I hadn't been kind of listening to jazz rock and jazz fusion, and getting into like the background of it all. But having done that recently, then listening to this, so many things just sort of clicked, fell into place, and I was kind of thinking, oh, that reminds me of this person, you know, oh he's done a bit of Jeff Beck there, or he's taken a bit of Al Di Meola here, or Alan Holdsworth. And these are all actually influences that Richie does cite himself. Like recently I've heard him sort of mention those names in interviews, and yeah, it just feels like this kind of coincidental thing, but it's all sort of coming together and falling into place, and just making me like it even more, I think. So yeah, he says himself on this email, I came up exposed to soul, funk and R&B music extensively, but at the same time I was a hard rock fan all the way. So I've got this sort of interesting dynamic happening with my music where you hear elements of Parliament or Curtis Mayfield, but then at the same time you've got Bad Company and early Rod Stewart influence as well. And then I started taking the guitar more seriously. I was drawn to fusion bands like the Dixie Dregs, Return to Forever and Alan Holdsworth's work. It's a wacky mixture, but that is the formula for Richie Kotzen. And I feel like this album is probably the clearest demonstration of that wacky mixture that he's done so far. It feels like, to me, given the things that he's said in the many hours of interviews that I've watched with him, that this album really expresses those early influences and those roots, you know, those musical roots. But yeah, let's dive into the tracks and you'll hopefully see what I mean. So the opening track, Cheap Shots, was the first single off of the new album. I saw this played live in Islington in July, and It was awesome. The video's great as well. The whole concept is what I love about this is just so sort of conceptually complete, as it were. Just it's a central metaphor. It works really well. It's consistent throughout the song. Lyrically, I think he's so tight, it's just kind of simple, but it really delivers. And it's instantly accessible, you get the idea straight away. And it just hooks you in straight away. And it's kind of straight out the door with this, I would say quite a sort of 70s-ish blues rock riff. But it's got that element, I think what makes it kind of 70s influenced, like as opposed to like a kind of 80s rock riff, I guess, is it's got that kind of glam stomp thing going on, like a bit of a T-Rex kind of thing. And that's there in sort of the use of tambourine on the track as well. It just has all these little sort of influences that I think you can kind of hear. But yeah, it's going in that sort of direction, almost kind of Rolling Stones-ish as well. But then it goes slightly off-piste in the pre-chorus. And it goes kind of back to that idea in the chorus, but it does throw you a little bit. The rhythm changes a little bit. It sort of pulls up sharp, and it's kind of like just making sure you're still, you're still listening. It just kind of catches your ear, and then you wonder where it's going, and then it comes back again to kind of like the main bluesy style riff. But yeah, it's just a sort of out and out rock song. It's fairly straightforward, and I think, it's a great one to start off the album. I love it when albums start with a song that just hits you straight in the face, I love that. When an album kind of starts off with something that's a bit gentle or takes a few more listens to get into, I kind of think, oh, that song could have gone third or fourth or something. My number one, album sort of track one, side one, when you used to have two sides on an album. I think the greatest ever side one, track one is Welcome to the Jungle on Appetite for Destruction. Closely followed by Black Shuck on Permission to Land. So these are the kind of album openers that I deem to be, the right kind of thing to open an album with. And Cheap Shots is one of those. It's one of those. It's up there. So yeah, as I say, brilliant live song. Really gets you kind of, stomping along with it, and it's a really high energy track, and it's just a great live one. So yeah, that's also sets the standard, right? Like for the rest of the album. So you think, wow, well, that's a great song. How are you going to follow it? How are you going to keep that energy up, kind of thing. So it's then really interesting to see what comes next. So the next song is a song called These Doors. And now we're straight in with the jazz fusion, jazz rock, super kind of funky track. It's got a really funky bass line. The drumming is very much more that kind of jazz style, and the guitar is just pure jazz fusion. Little bit Jeff Beck as well, I'd say. But the interesting thing about this song is that it's such a this is actually probably the song that typifies maybe the whole album, or maybe just, you know, is the distilled essence of Richie Kotzen, because the vocal is very much that kind of R&B soul sort of vocal. You can hear those influences that he talks about, kind of Rod Stewart. I also hear Prince a lot of the time in his vocal style, and certainly on this track. But it's also then bringing in kind of like a gospel element as well. When it gets to kind of like the pre-chorus, there's a part that kind of builds and builds, and there is that sort of gospel style element to it as well. So it's kind of layering all of these things, all of these influences together. And honestly, it's just such a great song. It's such another uplifting one, another kind of quite pacey song, and has a kind of uplifting, positive message as well. And it's quite a, you know, it feels optimistic, it feels hopeful, forward-looking. And I think all of those things are actually kind of part of Richie's personality, really. You know, he seems like such a forward-looking person. You know, he's always thinking about like what he wants to do next, where he wants to go next, and being open to things. And he just seems like a really kind of positive guy. And that's one of the things that makes going to see him live a really great experience. So yeah, absolutely love this one. I thought it was super interesting, and it's, you know, one of those that I think, had I not been recently listening to kind of all the jazz fusion stuff, would I have understood what he was doing here? Would I have understood like where he was coming from? I don't know. I'm not sure if I would, but it certainly helped me to have an appreciation and understanding of it. So yeah, I'm really glad. And when I heard this, I was like, oh yeah, jazz fusion, I like it. The third track on the album is Insomnia, and that's another one that so Cheap Shots, These Doors and Insomnia have all kind of been released. So I had heard them before, but not in the context of the album. I think it's really interesting that this is third on the album, because it does then kind of slow things down a little bit. So it takes the pace down just a little bit, and it's a much heavier kind of song. So we're back in hard rock territory, I suppose. The sort of opening riff, it's a little bit slower, it's a little bit heavier, and the vocal is quite different. So it's a kind of quieter, maybe more reflective, sort of introspective, atmospheric vocal in the verses anyway. So, you know, it's quite kind of low. He's using his kind of lower register. He does have an incredible vocal range. You know, he can go down there and obviously right up into falsetto and stuff. So he uses his entire vocal range. It's so impressive, and he does it live as well, with no problem, and you can't hear like any breaks or cracks in it at all. You know, it's all very smooth. So yeah, this is kind of one of those tracks where he sort of utilises that whole arsenal that he's got there. And it's quite interesting that, yeah, it goes on a journey from this sort of heavier, rockier approach, but kind of quieter and, you know, more reflective, into then quite a funky chorus again. So then we're back into this sort of, I think, Prince-esque kind of chorus. It's really, really funky. And it's really kind of still kind of 70s, but then I think kind of maybe more sort of 80s R&B-ish. So yeah, he will flip between these styles, like even within a song, but makes it work really, really well. Like, it all just fits together. You know, it doesn't kind of sound disjointed or anything. It all kind of flows quite naturally, and I think that's part of his skill as a musician, and as a vocalist, you know, to kind of see all that through. So yeah, it's a good, you know, interesting concept as well. And there are some videos, I'll put links to these in the description, but he's done quite a few of them now where he talks about where he's got his ideas from and how they've come to him and everything, which is always quite interesting to hear. You know, he's somebody who's he's always creating, you know, he has ideas all the time. Half the problem, I think, for him is like getting them down and capturing them and then kind of spinning them out into a full song, and finding the time to do that, you know. But this is kind of literally about insomnia, not being able to sleep, and then sort of finding a use for that, finding a way to make it work and doing something productive and useful, I suppose, in that time. And so he kind of just writes about anything and everything, all of his life experience, you know, and it doesn't even have to be kind of based in reality, but this one, he says anyway, is kind of based on kind of some recent experiences that he's had. So I found that pretty interesting. I also, looking at the video for this, I was really struck by the similarity to Wave of Emotion, and the video that I've seen of him kind of in the 90s, where you know, he always, I mean, he's Richie Kotzen, like, he always looks great, right? But in this particular video from, I think it was the mid-90s, he's like wearing some sort of pink satin affair, maybe some platform shoes, I'm not sure. And I don't know what's going on with the hair, really. But it's quite, like, I'm not even sure that at the time that it was okay. But the thing that I really love about him, or one of the things anyway, is that he doesn't care. Like, he does what he wants to do. I don't think he's ever tried to be sort of part of any particular musical scene or in any particular genre. Like, he is so eclectic. His musical taste is so eclectic. And yeah, I don't think he's ever tried to kind of fit any particular style. Maybe in the very, very early days of that kind of shred guitar thing, when that was like the hot thing in music. But part of, you know, I think part of the reason why he isn't more of a sort of global superstar, megastar that he kind of probably should be, is because, and again, he's said this himself, that whenever they've, you know, labels or anyone have tried to kind of put him into a box and package him as a particular thing, he has really struggled against that, and he's walked away from record deals that were potentially, you know, incredibly lucrative and would have sort of skyrocketed his career. But he's chosen not to do that. He's walked away from that because he doesn't want to be like dictated to. He doesn't want to be boxed in, and told what who to be and what kind of music to make. So, you know, he went off and did his own thing, and he's always done that. He's always been really individual and unique, and kind of that's what gives somebody artistic integrity at the end of the day, and I really respect that. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of get that in, but it does remind me of kind of Wave of Emotion a bit. Track number 4 is the title track, Nomad, and this to me is it's kind of halfway between kind of prog and jazz rock. It's got elements of both. It sounds very proggy to me anyway, as somebody who's really only just discovering the genre. But it's got a funny time signature that you can't quite follow. The kind of progression, the guitar, it's very jazz fusion. It sounds like the Mahavishnu Orchestra on you know, the Dance of Maya, which is one of the tracks that I've recently listened to. It's definitely got that. I can hear a kind of Al Di Meola influence. You know, not that I'm that familiar with it, but having just listened to that stuff, this is what this sounds like to me. And it's very, very different, I think, from lots of the songs that I've heard of Richie's before. It still has that kind of like soulful vocal and that kind of bluesy influence. So it's not kind of gone completely in that direction. But yeah, I can hear sort of Gentle Giant, some of the prog stuff that I covered with Scott, you know, that definitely comes up in this track. The 1970s influence is there, right there on the surface. Yeah, I feel like that was definitely not what I was expecting to come next. But that's what keeps it interesting and unpredictable, you know. So yeah, that was really yeah, quite an unexpected one for me anyway. Track 5 is called Escape, and for me this kind of follows on quite nicely from Nomad. It's carrying on that kind of proggy feel a little bit, but maybe more along the lines of kind of later Beatles, perhaps, kind of in the intro. Anyway, it's got that sort of almost Eastern influence in the, I think, kind of the scale that he's using, and I think it might be a sitar or something. I'm not entirely sure what instrument it is, sort of that he's playing in the intro, but it's definitely got a little bit of that sort of 70s Eastern-ish, sort of Beatles-ish feel about it. But then it, you know, and then again, kind of, it changes as you go through it. So it kind of starts like that. And it also has that like 70s style percussion as well. But then it kind of goes into more of a, you know, more of a kind of blues rock kind of chorus. And it's just a really, you know, just a really solid song. I think it's got a really kind of clear message, which again, it's one of the reasons why I love Richie, because he doesn't, not that he doesn't kind of go very deep with his lyrics, because they are kind of often about quite sort of deep emotional subjects. So the subject matter is, but he never makes it really very complicated to understand. You know, he gets his meaning across. Like it's right there. You know, you don't have to spend ages trying to figure out what, you know, metaphor he's using and what it means and everything. This song has a very clear meaning and message, and you know, and it's a good one. So I don't need to explain it. It is self-explanatory. Also slightly, a little bit sweary, but that's okay. We don't mind. I don't mind anyway. Track 6 is another one that he'd already kind of released before the album came out. It's called On the Table. I think it was the second one that came out after Cheap Shots. So I have been listening to this again over the last couple of months. It's another one that I will have in my head just for days. The chorus will just sort of be on a loop in my head, not in a bad way, like totally in a good way. I will be walking around doing something and I'll just find myself like humming it or singing it. It's super catchy. It's a lovely kind of descending kind of minor line, and again, kind of lyrically it all works, it all makes sense. And I just don't know how he does it, but he's kind of taking all of these influences. So in the start of the song, it's kind of it's got a super funky bass line again, really complex and, you know, sort of relentless, really driving it. You know, the bass really drives quite a lot of his music anyway. And the guy who plays bass with him, you know, very often, Dylan Wilson, is phenomenal, and I've talked about him in my gig review. But man, you know, Richie gives him quite a hard job, I think, writing these bass parts. They're very complex, very fast, and yeah, just relentless. But it's great, you know, that's what kind of gives it this incredible feel. So we've got this kind of funk stuff going on, but this is quite a heavy song, at least initially anyway. And I can hear, you know, he's talked about his early sort of hard rock influences, being things like kind of Iron Maiden, and obviously he's worked with Adrian Smith, and they've made an album together, or is it a couple of albums? So I can also hear that coming through, in particular on this song, and even a little bit. I would say the chorus is almost a little bit Iron Maiden in a way. And I feel like he's, in some ways, he's almost trying to sort of emulate Bruce Dickinson a little bit on this one. It's just in some of the ways he's using his sort of vibrato and kind of just going all over, up and down around his vocal range. It's another really impressive song. Hi everyone, Jo from The Edit here. Whilst I was editing this video, I realised that the battery on my lav mic had actually run out. And so the next song that I was going to talk about, or that I did talk about and I thought I had talked about, when I went to drop the clip in, it was completely without sound, which I hadn't noticed when I was recording the video. So apologies for that. So I will now tell you what I was going to say about the next track, which is called This Is a Test. I mean, clearly if this is a test, I've obviously failed. Epic fail. But yes, the track This Is a Test. It's a shame as well, because I'm sure I had some super interesting stuff in that clip, and now I can't remember exactly what I said. But the gist of it was that this is the track which is kind of very different from everything else on the album, really, in that it's an acoustic track. Richie Kotzen does lots of acoustic songs, and they are kind of some of his best and most kind of well-known and well-loved songs. High, I think, always goes down really, really well. I've said before on a number of occasions that Until You Suffer Some Fire and Ice is one of my favourite songs of all time. So, you know, his acoustic stuff is just superb, and this is another really lovely track. Just beautiful, really. It's just another one of his beautiful acoustic ballads, I suppose. But yeah, I now just can't exactly remember what it was that I wanted to say about it, other than the fact that I really like it, and it is quite different, as I've said, you know, from the rest of the songs on the album, which are sort of leaning more towards that kind of jazz, funk, 70s kind of sound, with the sort of hard rock influence in there as well. But this is more a classic Richie Kotzen acoustic ballad. So apologies that I'm doing this in my pyjamas, and that I don't know what I said in the original clip, but it was something along those lines anyway. Okay, I'll get back to the final song and the overall summary. The final track on the album is called Nihilist, and it's the latest track I think he's just released, but the whole album's out now anyway. So that was the kind of most recent one that I'd listened to. And he sort of says that Cheap Shots and Nihilist are kind of bookends, if you like, of the album. And I think there is a real order and logic and structure to the way the tracks kind of follow each other through the album. And it is kind of taking you on a particular journey. And we don't quite end up back where we started, but we are back into, on this last track, that whole jazz rock, jazz fusion thing. I can particularly hear, as I've been listening to it very recently, from like some of the notes that I made about the stuff that I was looking at with Andy Edwards, sort of Return to Forever, again the kind of Al Di Meola, Race with the Devil on the Spanish Highway. It sort of reminds me of, in particular, it's got, as that track does, a sort of almost Santana-esque flavour to it, as well as the jazz thing. It's got a sort of almost Spanish influence, I think, in the kind of tone of the guitar, but almost in a kind of Phrygian mode or something. There's something that reminds me of that very much, as well as there's an Alan Holdsworth track that I looked at as well, that I thought, oh, that's kind of reminiscent of Out From Under. So yeah, I can really sort of hear all those influences on this final track. And I think it works, you know, again, just works really, really well. It's yeah, again, kind of a thoughtful, reflective one. It has the rock influence as well, but really, I think this album is probably the one of his that I've heard where I can hear the most of the sort of influences that he tends to talk about quite a lot, like his early musical influences, particularly in terms of like the sort of soul funk stuff. But also, you know, as I've said, there are a couple of tracks where I could hear almost like Iron Maiden, Kiss, sort of 70s glam rock stuff, which he's kind of mentioned in various interviews before. I'll link to a couple of the interviews that I've looked at recently in the description, because obviously he's doing lots of stuff to promote the new album, and some of the sort of clips of him talking about how he wrote some of these songs on his own channel, so I'll put those in the description as well. And the other kind of exciting news is that I've discovered recently is that he's working with Tech 21 on a signature wah pedal. So he's worked with Tech 21 for a number of years. They make the Richie Kotzen fly rig, which he developed with them, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago. It's been out for a long time. It's kind of a multi-effects pedal that's got overdrive, delay, reverb, and I think a Leslie, he says, as well. So all of the kind of elements that he uses in his guitar sound, really. Richie is a very sort of analog guy. I've seen him advertising the sort of digital version of the Fender Twin Reverb a few years ago, but I could tell his heart wasn't really in it. He is not a digital amp guy. You know, he's not that much of an effects guy. He's quite old school. He likes real tube amps. You know, and that was what he had when he was playing live on stage. You know, he was using Marshalls of some description. I don't know what they were exactly. But yeah, so he tends to use and tends to favour kind of tube amps, and you know, going as far as to kind of say he prefers hand wired and all this stuff. So, you know, super analog. And yeah, he just uses this rig and has used this rig now for a number of years. And those are really the key kind of elements to his sound. You know, it's a bit of overdrive. He likes that kind of edge of breakup sound that we all love. You know, bit of reverb, bit of delay. And he does use a wah pedal. So in a way, it's kind of surprising that wasn't originally part of the fly rig, but I guess, you know, I guess he just kind of used that separately. But now, yeah, he is developing a signature one with them, which he has apparently used on the new album, and sort of tested the prototype. So hopefully it won't be too long until that sort of goes into production. But yeah, that's the wah sound that he's using on this album. So I think that's pretty cool as well, and I will be checking that out once I've got the hang of actually using a wah pedal. So when I get a little bit more confident with that, I'll have a look at this Tech 21 Richie Kotzen signature one when it comes out. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Nomad. I really, really hope that you'll all enjoy it and listen to it and enjoy it as much as I have. Whether or not you're already a fan, if you weren't already a fan, go and check it out, because even if you weren't keen on maybe the stuff that he's done in the Winery Dogs or something, this is something different. It is, I'd say, more personal to him, and I think it's better for it. So go and check it out, and let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, thanks everyone.